Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Justin here. Here to make a review of Ryuga Gotoku Ishin, or as what some non-Japanese players fans would say, Yakuza Ishin. This has yet to be released in the U.S. or internationally at all, though many fans have, let's just say, like, hey, we want a release of this. And in recent interviews, Nagoshi says, hey, he hears the fans, but they just don't have the time to do it right now. And I kind of understand, but I would like to make this review to give an opportunity of, how we could have this game presented to non-Japanese audiences. Just allow me to review the game, and if I were to localize this game for non-Japanese audiences, I'll tell you how I do it. But first, yeah, so as many of you can tell, this is a game that takes place that uses historical Japan. So specifically, the mid 1860s, which is towards the end of the Edo era, and before it becomes the Meiji era. And if you've seen Rurouni Kenshin, then you know what the Meiji era is. It's pretty much the late 19th century, while during this time in the game, it takes place in the mid 1860s, so you can equate that to the US Civil War. So I'm assuming this game takes place in 1863, 1864, somewhere along those lines. But yes, many of the cast members of the franchise, largely for 1 through 5, they're used as representations of historical Japanese figures. For example, the Kiryu character, he's used as a representation of two Japanese historical figures, Sakamoto Ryoma and Saito Hajime. Yeah, if you don't know who Sakamoto Ryoma is, he was the guy who pushed for Japan to modernize itself after Commodore Perry. He showed up in Yokohama and he's like, hey, open up your borders. And he was like, okay. And he was one of the guys that pushed for it. And he was a real life figure. And of course, if you've seen Rurouni Kenshin, Saito Hajime, he was a real life figure too, and he was a soldier for the Shinsengumi, an elimination squad that wanted to keep the shogun in power. So even though the story masterfully finds a way to make these two historical figures as one, in real life they were two separate people. And this kind of largely gets into certain aspects such as the assassination of Sakamoto Ryoma and so on. And the story is driven by how Sakamoto Ryoma's mentor, Yoshida, I forgot the first name, but Kazuma, he's the representation of this character. They play his real life assassination into this. And they recognizes that the assassin uses this particular martial sword fighting style, and the only way they can find this person is to join the Shinsengumi. So after the assassination, Ryoma, he leaves Tosa, which is now Kochi Prefecture, and Shikoku runs away to Kyoto in order to join the Shinsengumi. Upon joining the Shinsengumi, he is given the duties as the captain of the 3rd unit, and he must, engage in whatever activities there are. And from there, he tries to figure out, okay, who's the guy that can use this kind of martial art? And if I can find that guy, I can find the guy who assassinated my mentor. So that's pretty much the gist of the story. Of course, a lot of historical figures come into play, represented by other Ryuga Gotoku characters. For example, Katsura, I forgot the first name, but his name was Katsuda, and he was a character in the first Rurouni Kenshin OVA, where he's one of Kenshin's bosses. Akiyama represents that character. And there's also Saigo Takamori, who's also one of the founding fathers of modern Japan, and Ryuji represents that character. and there are other characters who represent other members of the Shinsengumi, like Mine. He represents one of the vice main captains. Majima, he's used to be the Okita Seijiro, I believe. He was also in Rurouni Kenshin a bit. Majima represents that character. And, if you want to see more, considering the nature of this game, we don't know whether or not this is going to be released internationally. I don't know if I should give spoilers or not, but, I'll just give examples as the way that I have been. But yeah, you're getting a pretty good historical drama of through the franchise. That's all I can say about it. So as for the combat, you know how in Zero and Kiwami you have all these fighting styles, right? For Kiryu and Majima. Well, this is kind of where it first starts. You have multiple styles for Saito or / Sakamoto. Like, he can just use his bare fist for fighting, he can use his sword, he can use his gun, or a hybrid of the sword and the gun, and so on. And the leveling up just works just like in Kiwami. You get like a certain generic orb, or you get an orb for that particular style, and you put it in, and you just level up. And it's pretty much the same, the action is just balls to the walls, high octane, anything to get you excited. The boss battles are pretty fun. What else? Yeah, no, I'll get back to that later. It's just anything you can think of. If you've played, any generic Ryuga Gotoku game, then you know what you're expecting in that sense. There's also the generic markets where you can buy old style food, traditional sweets, and, anything old school you can think of, appropriate to those times. It's funny, there is a Don Quixote store in that game, but it's not written in hiragana, in katakana, it's written in hiragana to make it more culturally authentic. So, of course, there are many side quests, and some of the side quests do take into account Japanese history. Like, when you stay at this inn, one of the people that stays like in the room next to Saito is a parody of Natsume Soseki, a very famous Japanese author from that period. Like, they make references to some of the stories he wrote, like Bochan or Waga Hai Neko Dearu, and some other stories he also written. But yeah, they do make some historical references to that. And of course, there's also the Fighting Underground Arena. It has its own unique gimmick, like, okay, you gotta take on this guy with this style, you gotta take on this guy with this style, you gotta take on this guy with this style, and you can win money and prizes, and, pretty much anything you've done with an Underground Arena from other Yakuza games, it more or less applies here too. Of course, there's also, it has its own version of karaoke, or karaoke for English speakers. There's a dancing mini game, and there's a fishing mini game. And there's also a mini game where you're chopping wood. I would say Shenmue 3's chopping wood is more exciting in my opinion. And yeah. And when you join the Shinsengumi, there's a certain booth where you can do jobs for the Shinsengumi, where you have to go to this place and do some fights, and you can use those fights to get some experience, get some money, get some prizes, and recruit new members. So, yeah. What else can I say? It's been a while since I played. It's been a year. It's on for PS3 and PS4. I have both versions. I played the PS4 version last year. So, yes, of course, Komaki's in the game, and he's there to train you. And there is a Haruka in the game. She doesn't really play any significant role to the story. She's a side character where you help take care of her house. And you can plant vegetables in the garden, and you can use the vegetables for your own cooking mini game, for your own health, or to sell for money. That's all there is to it for her game. But the cooking game, I'm is pretty hard, especially cooking the fish. I never got how to do it. And what else is there? The music's pretty rad. It's very, it does use some hardcore rock, but it knows when to use traditional Japanese acoustics and percussions. And yeah, even though it uses One OK Rock in the soundtrack, and I've personally never been a fan of One OK Rock. No offense to the fans, but they're just not my thing. The voice acting is top notch. Most of the Japanese used is pretty much modern Japanese. They'll use more traditional, old style Japanese when appropriate. Like they'll use like many foreign words weren't really a thing like it is now in the modern Japanese language. So they'll use a Japanese equivalent to. I can't think of any examples at the top of my head, but that's what the game does. So yeah, that's it on that. Okay, so the next question, localizing it. Of course, the excuse that Sega can make is the game is too Japanese. Okay, I get that. But the whole appeal of the Yakuza franchise is it's a very, very Japanese game, and Ishin gets pretty, hardcore into it. So that's one of the main reasons why fans would want to play this game. And and of course, it's very Japanese in a very different way this time. I mean, if I were to localize this game, I would have to make a special edition where Sega, they have to make a book about who the real people were, how this fits, how that fits, what's happened and what's didn't happen. Like, for example, you have to make a guide saying who this guy was, who this guy was, who this guy was. What's the Ikedeya incident? What's Tosa? What's Gion? Who were the Shinsengumi? And so on. But yes, onto the Shinsengumi. As I said before, if you've seen Rurouni Kenshin, you pretty much know who they are. Of course, I just kind of want to get into something. For example, of course, Kiryu always gets into fights. So does Saito. But the funny thing about the real life Shinsengumi, they were very, very discouraged from getting into street fights. And I just thought, how about how that was kind of unrealistic. Like, for example, I don't know who it was that got an actual Yakuza member to play the series, but he talks about like, hey, if someone's gonna, they wouldn't get into a fight like this often. It would cause trouble. I mean, for Kiryu's character, Sakamoto or Saito getting into fights as a Shinsengumi member, in real life, that would cause problems for the Shinsengumi too. Of course, some people may take issue with it, some people won't. But if I were to make a guide saying like, hey, this is what happens, these are the rules, I would have to pick that out. Of course, talk about this fighting style, talk about that fighting style. Like, why was this Ishin thing going on? I mean, you sort of have to make a history book for the international audiences to help them better understand what this game is all about. And I think that's kind of one of the main factors that may prevent or help with its release. I don't know, but that's how I would do it. But anyway, that's just my generic review of Ishin. And if you got any questions, feel free to shoot a comment.